Hi everyone, welcome to X-Ray the Panda. I'm Paul. Today we have two topics. Our first topic, a pilot who committed suicide while taking everyone down with him. On March 21st of this year, China Eastern Flight MU-5375 was traveling from Kunming to Guangzhou when it inexplicably plunged from an altitude of 29,000 feet into a mountainside, killing all 132 people on board. Flight data from the doomed plane suggests that someone in the cockpit sent the Boeing 737 into a near vertical descent while cruising at a high altitude. In a summary of its preliminary report released on April 20th, the CAAC, the Civil Aviation Administration of China, just merely said, or possibly lied, that the two black boxes were severely damaged and that the data restoration analysis work is still in progress. The flight crew and maintenance personnel met the relevant standards. There were no dangerous items on board, nor were there any forecasts of dangerous weather, but nothing related to the cause of the crash. After the crash, there were rumors about a co-pilot intentionally crashing the plane, pointing to the CAAC's remarks on the mental health of the aviation staff following the crash. At a meeting on aviation safety on April 6, the CAAC director urged Communist Party officials at all levels to stabilize the thoughts of their teams, make utmost efforts to solve employees' problems with the work, life, and study, and ensure their physical and mental health. Some fear once this mental health monitor action becomes available, it would probably evolve into a disguised mind monitor. The reason is because in mainland China, an unstable mental state always indicates the staff thinking of job hopping from a state-run corporation to a private airline company, or they disagree with their supervisors, or couldn't keep the mindset on the same track as the Chinese Communist Party, or other such similar things. Anyone who expresses those ideas will be under repair, even persecution to different degrees. What CAAC pays most attention to with the flight crew is a political view instead of its mental health and anti-pressure ability, as they claim. Many insiders in China would mix up mental health and political thought, as their understanding of mental health is different from Western countries, and that's how they disguise the replacement of concepts. For example, there was one pilot who was rejected to be hired because he wasn't willing to give up his theism belief. The insider said, "It's actually not just towards airline crews. Their mind monitor and control aims at all ground workers are just as strict. I've barely heard any mental health evaluations from airline crews. If the mind and thought are at the same pace as the Chinese Communist Party, then the mental health will be considered just as sound. It sounds absurd, but that's pretty much the truth." Among the three pilots in flight MU-5735, the co-pilot had the highest suspicion of suicide. He is an honored pilot with 40 years experience who used to be the teachers of pilots and a member of the inspection committee, someone who held the highest level in the pilot's industry. However, he was demoted to a co-pilot to assist the captain who used to be a student after his company, a well-profited private company, was purchased by a defective state-run airline company. Not only was his salary reduced by at least 70%, but also the humiliation of being suppressed by the company, as those very experienced pilots who were demoted to become co-pilots have very little chance to be promoted again. 20 minutes after the crash happened, the police searched the hotel room of the co-pilot and found a long suicide letter, which mainly complained how he was squeezed by the higher-ups in the company, and all his investment was gone, including all his life savings because of China's bad economy. But the government officials deny this and say the suicide was a rumor. 2 months later, the so-called black box flight data recorders recovered from the site were sent to the United States for analysis. That data shows that someone, either a pilot or someone who forced their way into the cockpit, input orders to send the Boeing 737 into a nosedive, cited people familiar with the probe. The plane did what it was told to do by someone in the cockpit, a person who is familiar with American officials' preliminary assessment said. U.S. officials believe their conclusion is backed up by the fact that the Chinese investigators have so far not indicated any problems with the aircraft or flight controls that could have caused the crash and would need to be addressed in future flights. In a statement, the CAAC reiterated the staff had met safety requirements before takeoff, the plane was not carrying dangerous goods, and did not appear to run into any inclement weather. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, China's ruling Communist Party moved quickly to control information, revving up its censorship machine as per usual as media outlets and local residents raced to the crash site. After the fatal descent near the southern city of Wuzhou, authorities swiftly cordoned off a huge area, and China's internet regulator announced it had scrubbed vast amounts of illegal information on the crash from China's tightly controlled web, with a social media hashtag bearing the plane's flight number appearing to be censored. There are a few reasons the Chinese government would cover up the truth. One is to wipe the responsibility from this state-run company so that they don't need to pay the compensation to the victims' families, as well as the officials who are supposed to take responsibility for this accident, which is China's deadliest crash in around 30 years. Another reason, the pilot who took everyone's life in the airplane probably reminds the public that Xi Jinping is similar to the suicide, taking the airplane of the entire China and crashing, leading to everyone's death. Our second topic is escaping Shanghai. Although Shanghai officials announced its zero COVID virus on a social level, the full-scale lift of all of its COVID restrictions don't seem to be happening anytime in the foreseeable future. Ever since May 16th, the day of lifting the lockdown, a burst of people escaping Shanghai occurred. Since public transportation was still under tight restrictions, and the procedure of leaving Shanghai was difficult to complete, most of them walked at least 12 miles on foot to the Hongqiao railway station to flee. The lines waiting at the entrance was so long that one couldn't see the end. By May 17th, there were still numerous citizens walking to the railway station with their luggage. Some of them had to sleep on the street or even dump their luggage in order to conserve energy. The railway staff revealed that just within the first 2 days, there were about 13,000 people who left Shanghai by train. A delivery man revealed that it was extremely difficult to buy the ticket he needed to return to his hometown. The ticket is really hard to get, even if there's 10 times more expensive than normal, the man said. Basically, it's impossible to buy a non-stop ticket. There are even more people who were lucky enough to have bought the ticket, but they couldn't get inside the station because of the waiting line. Also, there were people wandering outside the station to scramble for one ticket, and it took forever, so they had to sleep outside. A man paid a ticket scalper equivalent to an extra $100 that he finally got the ticket. As you know, it was considered super lucky to be able to even have just one ticket. People like us who have low job and income, we still have to pay a big amount of quarantine fees when we get to our destination. Another man from Anhui province who is working in the plastic surgery industry had said, "If I stay in Shanghai any longer, I'll starve to death soon. The community I was living in was under lockdown for 2 months starting March 18th. When I was driving to my hometown, the policeman stopped me on the highway telling me to return twice. My journey was delayed for almost 3 hours." He continued, "I was living in a shared flat when the Shanghai government was distributing food. It was based on the number of households instead of individuals. There were 5 or 6 families living in that flat, but we were just given the food for one person, so everyone had very little food after sharing. We had no choice but to group purchase for daily supplies. However, those foods are so expensive that we can't afford them. The expenses in Shanghai were already expensive to begin with, and I don't have so much savings. After hanging in there for 2 months, I felt my world was coming to an end. My clients are from all over the country. I've had no income for 2 months since the lockdown. He continued, the full lift of COVID policy in Shanghai won't happen in the near future. There was always news about lifting the lockdown, but downtown won't be lifted. First, they distribute traffic permits, one for each household. Every time there was only 1 or 2 people allowed to go outside for a limited couple hours to purchase daily supplies. There are so many who desperately want to get back to their hometown, but couldn't. Another man who is eager to return to his hometown, but had no money to buy a ticket, rigged up a plastic foam raft trying to boat to his hometown. With his dog on board, he planned to boat almost 750 miles on the waterway. Many saw him on the way, trying to persuade him to change a plan as it's too risky. The reply from the man was that he can swim if anything happens. Everyone had no choice but to pray for him to return home safely. The senior vice mayor of Shanghai said earlier that Shanghai would have the virus wiped clean before May 20th. The date they announced the zero clearance was on May 16th, which was just 3 days before the commanded date by the Chinese Communist Party. So now they can declare in a high-sounding voice that they won the battle with COVID virus. On May 16th, after the announcement of the lifting of COVID restrictions, a couple communities in Shanghai suddenly opened their gates for a while and told the residents to shop in various designated areas. Some communities' property managements even provided tricycles to pick them up and take them back. But it wasn't until night that citizens realized they were merely let out for being government propaganda props. A sheet that was posted online, which was called a performance list, showed there were journalists specifically in charge of the filming at different times and different locations. For example, at Huangpu Jing'an, Pudong, and Hongkou districts, from 12:15 to 12:40, 4 journalists had to film feeding pigeons in a square, delivery stations sending out supplies, and various other tasks. Afterwards, these journalists also had to record the human activities like dining, hospitalizations, and the views throughout the journey from different locations and different times. This is then what the government put on TV to show everyone about the Shanghai COVID policy lifting, which was just a forge of all the props. Despite how flawed these counterfeit shows look, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't care so much, as the propaganda behind them is what the purpose is. In this propaganda, the Shanghai people have restored their freedom. The vitality of life has returned to Shanghai again. In conclusion, allow me to tell you a joke. At the end of 2019, if you said the COVID virus was scary, the government would arrest you. Now, if you question its dynamic zero COVID policy and say the Omicron variant isn't scary at all, then the government will arrest you. All right, that's the end of our show today. Thanks for listening. Please share, subscribe, and give us a like. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.